Have you ever wondered how albinism worked? No? Well, don't you worry, because this time I'm actually not going to tell you. Get clickbaited. Ha! No, but really, we are going to cover albinism. Though before that, we should probably skim through some basic details about genetics that you might want to know before we get all fancy with mutations and diseases and whatnot. So whatever are the fancy things that you are going to have to know.
Number 1.
Simple inheritance is basically inheritance or heredity, which is the process of your parents transmitting traits to you for dummies. In simple inheritance, expressed physical traits or phenotypes are controlled by a single gene and 2 alleles. Alleles basically mean the alternative forms of a gene, and if it is dominant, it will unconditionally be expressed regardless
of its genotype.
Or recessive, which means it would be only expressed if the offspring happens to be homozygous recessive. In fact, albinism is a recessive trait, which makes it relatively rare.
Number 2.
Complex inheritance is basically inheritance, but not so anymore for dummies. In complex inheritance, a lot more factors are included. For example, codominance, where it considers the possibility that the offspring could be a mix of the parent's traits, not just the dominant one. Complex inheritance also includes polygenetic inheritance, codominance, incomplete dominance, and sex-linked genes. However, albinism is not a genotype that can be described as a type of complex inheritance. This is mainly because there isn't such a thing in the world where offspring can be half albino and half normal. It just doesn't exist. But okay, how do we actually see how this all works? Why, with a Punnett square, of course. But wait, what is a Punnett square? Well, a Punnett square is a, you guessed it, square. Except it's more a table, if anything. It's a graphical way of depicting the offsprings of a breeding event, and each box in the table represents one possible outcome of traits for the offspring. Okay, so let's use albinism as an example. Let's say Bobby, the dad, has a heterozygous allele of the albino gene and the non-albino gene. Now the mom, Sally, is albino, which means their genotype must be lowercase a, assuming that lowercase a stands for albinism and uppercase A stands for normal. Let's plug that in a Punnett square. Now, when you move Bobby letters to the right and Sally letters to the bottom, you can see that this creates the following: uppercase A, lowercase a, lowercase a, lowercase a, uppercase A, lowercase a, and lowercase a, lowercase a. This means that 50% of their offspring will be albino while the other 50 won't. See? Not that hard. Sure, that's all fine and dandy, but how on earth does a little strand of DNA get turned into eye color, hair color, ear shape, and so on? Well, the actual useful bits of DNA, or exons, get split open and copied into RNA, staring at the promoter, which is a sequence of DNA to signal the RNA polymerase, which is the enzyme that uses available nitrogen bases in the nucleolus to make mRNA, which stands for messenger RNA, that, you guessed it, sends messages, to start the copying process, and ending at the terminator, which is an area on the DNA that tells the RNA polymerase to stop the process. This process is called transcription. But mRNA is about as good as DNA when it comes to expressing phenotypes, so this obviously isn't the end yet. The mRNA leaves the nucleolus and goes to a ribosome, where rRNA essentially reads the info on the mRNA and tells the matching tRNA to bring the required nucleotide to the ribosome to make a specific protein. These tRNA actually each have a unique codon, which is a sequence of 3 nitrogen bases, and it codes for a specific amino acid. In fact, there's a whole guide wheel thing called the codon wheel that tells you what codes for what. The protein that the mRNA codes for is what ends up actually expressing the phenotype. This protein making process, or protein synthesis process, is called translation. Last but not least, it's time to tell you guys all the wondrous details of albinism. But wait, I haven't really explained genetic mutations to you yet, have I? Well, basically, genetic mutations are essentially the changes in the DNA sequence of an organism. To put it shortly, DNA, you screwed up! There are many types of DNA mutations, some of which include insertion, deletion, duplication, and translocation. In DNA, adenine normally pairs with thymine, and cytosine usually pairs with guanine. But with mutations, it can be different, each of which being just what it sounds like. Most of the time, these errors occur when a cell is going through meiosis or DNA replication. Sometimes, chromosomes do a little whoopsie and don't separate completely. This is called non-disjunction. This can create shortages of chromosomes in either the egg or sperm cell, which is something that we don't really want. Getting back on track, what exactly is albinism? Well, albinism is a phenotype with pretty rare genetic mutations, which affects the amount of melanin, a substance in our body that produces eye, hair, and skin pigmentation. People with albinism are also more prone to sunburn and skin cancer. Albinism may also make humans have vision problems. However, albinism is not contagious, so yeah, don't freak out if you meet a guy with this genetic disease. There are many types of this genetic mutation, one of them being
oculocutaneous
albinism. And it's the most common type. Basically, at least visually from the outside, you got cool characteristics such as white skin, hair, and eyes. There are fewer cooler types though, such as ocular albinism, which only affects your eyes, and Hermansky-Pudlik syndrome, which affects your blood, bruising issues, and stomach problems. Yeah, real bummer. In all OCA and some OA, albinism is passed on from a recessive inheritance pattern. This means that a child has to get 2 recessive albinism genes to get albinism. This also means that the parents must be either homozygous recessive or heterozygous. Did you know that even though albinism is not contagious, it can be inherited through families? This means that if your parents got it, you might have a chance of getting it as well. To add on to that, there isn't any cure whatsoever. You just gotta have to hate the sun and apply a lot of sunscreen. I know I said having albinism is kinda cool just like a few seconds ago, but I kinda lied. Having this disease can affect your body in various ways. Some include patches of missing skin pigment, crossed eyes, rapid eye movement, vision impairments, and light sensitivity. Now, totally not copying the ending of Crash Course's summary format at all. Today, we learned about simple inheritance, complex inheritance, dominant and recessive genotypes, Punnett squares, transcription, translation, and genetic mutations. I also briefly explained the symptoms, pros, and cons of albinism, as well as explaining each subtopic through examples of albinism. But wait, there's more. We haven't reached project requirement yet, and I really am too tired to literally do anything else, so have this. DNA. In DNA, there are 4 different nitrogenous bases: thymine, adenine, cytosine, guanine, and a sugar base, deoxyribose. DNA is shaped in a double helix form, whereas RNA is shaped in a single helix, and in RNA, the base, thymine, is replaced with uracil, and the sugar with ribose. In DNA, the T is paired with A and the C is with G. An easy way to remember this is the apple is in the tree and the car is in the garage. In RNA, since the T is replaced, A is now paired with U, and since they are paired, they must also have the same amount of it in the DNA. DNA replication. You replicate DNA with the DNA polymerase. How does it work? You unzip the DNA and replicate paired nitrogenous bases with it. Semi-conservative replication, basically meaning that each new DNA consists of half the old DNA. Leading/lagging strand. Basically, one is towards a fork and the other away. Fork? No, not the utensil. Telomerase. Basically, the repeated ends of the end of a chromosome in a eukaryote. I hope you enjoyed the video. and I'll see y'all later. Bye!